Sleep tight, Mom. We're waking you up early for the trip. Those were the last words I heard before my world completely collapsed. Hope Miller, 70 years old, a mother, a hardworking widow, abandoned by her own blood on the day she was most looking forward to. If anyone had told me a week ago that my family would leave me sleeping while they went on a trip they never wanted me to be a part of, I would have defended my children tooth and nail. But here I am, sitting in my empty living room, surrounded by the most painful silence I have ever known in my entire existence. It all started on Thursday morning when Robert came to my house with that smile that, I now understand, was loaded with lies. My eldest son, the man to whom I gave life 45 years ago, approached me while I was making breakfast, just as I have every morning since I was widowed 5 years ago. "Mom, I have incredible news for you," he said with that sweet voice he used to use when he was a boy and wanted something special. Patricia, my daughter-in-law, was in the kitchen pretending to wash dishes, but I could feel she was listening to every word. We decided to take a family trip to celebrate our 20th anniversary. It's going to be wonderful. My heart filled with a joy I hadn't felt in months. Finally, my family was including me in something important. "Is it true, son? Everyone together?" I asked, feeling the emotion trembling in my voice as happy tears threatened to spill from my eyes. Robert nodded enthusiastically, and Patricia walked over from the kitchen with a smile that, at that moment, seemed genuine. "Yes, Hope. The whole family together. It'll be just like old times," my daughter-in-law said, touching my shoulder in a way I interpreted as affectionate. If I had known then what I know now, I would have noticed the coldness in her eyes, the way she avoided looking directly at me. Immediately, I began making plans in my head. I ran to my bedroom and started pulling my best dresses out of the closet, the ones I saved for special occasions and almost never had the chance to wear. I imagined the photographs we would take, the meals we would share, the long conversations we could have without the distractions of daily life. Patricia appeared in my bedroom doorway with a strange expression, but I was so excited I didn't pay it the attention it deserved. "Hope, you need to rest well tonight," she said with a voice I now recognize was full of falsehood. "We're waking you up bright and early tomorrow so we don't miss the flight." That night I went to sleep earlier than usual, my heart full of expectations. I tied back my gray hair with care, applied the night cream my granddaughter Haley had given me for Mother's Day, and lay down thinking about how lucky I was to have such a loving family. "Sleep tight, Mom. We're waking you up early for the trip." Those were the words Robert shouted to me from the hallway before closing my bedroom door. I fell asleep, smiling, silently giving thanks for having such attentive and considerate children. How wrong I was about what those words actually meant. A strange noise woke me around 10 a.m. The house was in a sepulchral silence that gave me immediate chills. I got up quickly, thinking maybe I had overslept, and they were waiting for me nervously in the living room. But when I reached the kitchen, the only thing I found was a note on the island that would destroy my world completely. "Mom, we decided it would be better to travel alone this time. The house is tidy, and there is food in the fridge. We'll be back in a week. Robert, Patricia, and Haley." My legs trembled, and I had to grab onto the chair to keep from falling to the floor. I read the note 1, 2, 3 times, hoping the words would change, that it was a nightmare from which I would soon wake up. But no, there was the reality written in Robert's handwriting, the same handwriting I had taught him when he was 6 years old. My family had planned everything from the beginning. They never intended to take me with them. The surprise was a lie. The preparations were theater. The smiles were masks. They had deliberately excluded me, while pretending to include me, playing with my feelings as if I were a foolish child who doesn't understand when she's being tricked. I walked through the house like a ghost, trying to understand how it had come to this point. In Robert and Patricia's room, I found evidence of their preparations. The suitcases were gone. The clothes in the closet had been organized differently. Even Haley's toothbrush had disappeared from the bathroom. Everything had been planned meticulously. While I slept, dreaming of our family trip, they were waking up in silence, packing in silence, leaving in silence, leaving me behind as if I were an old piece of furniture that got in the way. I sat in the living room where we had spent so many afternoons watching TV together, where we celebrated the grandkids' birthdays, where Robert used to tell me about his problems at work. Now, that living room felt like a mausoleum of memories that, apparently, had only been important to me. The family photos on the walls looked down at me with mockery, reminding me that the smiling woman in those images had been a fool who believed in the unconditional love of family. The loneliness that took hold of me wasn't just physical, it was emotional, spiritual. It was the painful realization that the people for whom I had sacrificed everything saw me as a nuisance, a burden, something they needed a vacation from. I thought about all the times I babysat Haley when she was a baby so Robert and Patricia could work. I thought of the nights I spent awake when Robert had that car accident and the money from my Social Security check that I had shared without hesitation when they had financial difficulties. I remembered especially that time Patricia had that severe lung infection, and I stayed at the hospital for 3 weeks, caring for her day and night. I fed her, read books to her, sang her songs when she couldn't sleep from the fever. "Hope, you are like a mother to me," she had told me then with tears in her eyes. "I don't know what we would do without you." Those words, which at the time filled me with joy, now sounded like calculated lies, emotional manipulation from a woman who even then knew exactly how to handle me. The first full day alone in the house was endless. Every corner reminded me of some moment I had considered special, but which clearly for them had just been routine. The recliner where Robert sat to watch football on Sundays, the kitchen where I prepared their favorite meals, the backyard where I played with Haley when she was little. Everything felt contaminated by the realization that my presence there was tolerated, not wanted, endured out of obligation, not celebrated out of love. I tried to call my sister Rose, but I remembered she was visiting her children in Chicago. I thought about calling the neighbors, but shame stopped me. How could I explain to Mrs. Higgins that my own family had abandoned me? How could I admit that I had been so naive, so blind, so desperate to believe in their affection that I didn't see the signs that had probably been there for months? In the evening, when we would normally be having dinner together, I sat alone at the dining table with a can of soup I could barely taste. The silence was deafening. There were no voices arguing about work. There was no Haley telling me about her high school classes. There was no Patricia complaining about the neighbors. Only the sound of the grandfather clock my late husband Michael had bought when we got married, marking every second of my abandonment. That night, when I tried to sleep in my bed, Robert's words echoed in my head like a cruel joke. "Sleep tight, Mom. We're waking you up early for the trip." They had found the perfect way to lie to me without technically lying. They woke me up early for the trip, only their trip didn't include me. Their early rise was to leave without me, not to take me with them. They had played with words as if I were a dumb child who doesn't understand adult tricks. By the second day, reality began to solidify like cement in my chest. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't an impulsive decision. It had been planned, discussed among them, approved by everyone. At some point, probably while I was making dinner or washing their clothes, they had sat down to plan how to get rid of me for a week. "And what do we do with Mom?" they would have asked. "We leave her sleeping and just go," would have been the answer. Simple, effective, no confrontation. I realized I had been living a lie for weeks, maybe months. Every smile they had given me, every "good morning, Mom" they had said, every hug they had allowed had been acting. I was the foolish old woman who didn't realize she was in the way, who didn't understand that her presence was a burden, who believed the affection she gave was returned when in reality it was only tolerated. The house felt different without them, but not because I missed them. It felt different because for the first time I could see the truth without the masks they wore when I was present. The dirty dishes I normally washed stayed in the sink because there was no one expecting me to clean them. The laundry I normally folded stayed in the basket because there was no one pretending my service was appreciated. For the first time in years, I didn't have to smile when I didn't feel like it. I didn't have to pretend I was okay when I wasn't. On the third day, while tidying the living room that was already perfectly organized, I found an envelope that had fallen behind the sofa. It was a bill for Haley's cell phone that I had been paying without Robert asking me, simply because I wanted to help. $50 a month from my pension that I gave gladly so my granddaughter could stay connected. The envelope was open, and inside there was a note written by Patricia. "We finally got the old lady to pay for Haley's phone. One less thing to worry about." The old lady. That was what they called me when they thought I couldn't hear them. Not Mom, not Hope, not Grandma. The old lady who paid bills, the old lady who cooked, the old lady who took care of the house, the old lady who could easily be deceived into believing they loved her while they used her as an unpaid maid and an emergency ATM. That afternoon, for the first time in months, I really looked at myself in the mirror in my bedroom. I saw a 70-year-old woman who had dedicated her entire adult life to caring for others, who had put her family's needs above her own, who had accepted being treated like domestic help in her own home in exchange for crumbs of feigned affection. I saw a woman who had been so desperate to feel loved that she had ignored all the signs that she was being used. But I also saw something else in that mirror. I saw a woman who still had strength, who still had dignity, who still had options. Robert and Patricia had made a mistake by leaving me alone with time to think, to reflect, to see the situation without their constant manipulations. They had assumed I would be there waiting for them like a faithful pet, grateful that they returned to tolerate me for a few more weeks. The fourth day, I woke up with a mental clarity I hadn't felt in years. No more tears, no more self-pity, no more excuses for their behavior. If my family had decided I was disposable, then it was time for them to discover exactly what my absence meant in their lives. I would no longer be the old lady who did everything for them. It was time for Hope Miller to take control of her own life. While I ate breakfast alone in my kitchen, I made the first decision I had made for myself in decades. I wasn't going to be there when they returned. I wasn't going to pretend everything was fine. I wasn't going to accept an apology and go back to the routine as if nothing had happened. Robert and Patricia wanted a vacation from me, so I would give them a permanent vacation. For the first time in years, I smiled genuinely. They were right about one thing. It was time for Hope Miller to go on a trip, only it would be a very different trip than the one they had imagined. It would be a journey toward my own dignity, toward my own respect, toward a life where I wouldn't have to beg for the love that should be unconditional. The note they had left was still on the kitchen table, but it no longer caused me pain. Now I saw it for what it truly was, a gift. A gift that opened my eyes, that showed me the truth, that gave me the perfect excuse to do what I should have done years ago. Robert had written, "We'll be back in a week," with such confidence, so sure I would be there waiting as always. What a surprise they were going to get. I put the note in my purse. I would need it later, as evidence, as a reminder, as proof that this decision wasn't impulsive, but completely justified. They had chosen to abandon me first. I was simply responding with the same energy. If I was so easy to discard, then they were too. That night, for the first time in a week, I slept deeply. There was no guilt, no doubt, no fear, only determination. Tomorrow I would start a new life. A life where Hope Miller would be treated with the respect she deserved, or she wouldn't be treated at all. At 70 years old, I had finally learned that it is better to be alone with dignity than accompanied with humiliation. The days of being the old lady were officially over. Now it was time to show them what they had lost by treating me as if I were disposable. Robert and Patricia had planted the seeds of their own destruction the day they decided they could play with me as if I were a fool. They were about to discover they had completely underestimated the woman who had given them everything. The morning of the 5th day, I woke up with a strange energy running through my veins. It wasn't happiness, it wasn't sadness, it was something deeper. It was the clarity that comes when you finally stop lying to yourself. I got up early, as I had done for the last 50 years of my life, but this time it wasn't out of habit or obligation. It was because I had work to do, plans to execute, a new life to build. As I brewed my morning coffee in the silent kitchen, I began to recall things I had buried deep in my memory. Small humiliations I had justified, hurtful comments I had ignored, moments where I should have defended myself but chose to keep the family peace. Like that time 2 years ago when Patricia told her sister on the phone that taking care of Hope was like having a very high-maintenance pet. I was in the living room folding her laundry when I heard her, but I pretended I hadn't heard anything because confronting her meant conflict. And I had learned to avoid conflict at all costs. Or when Robert came home drunk after a gathering with his friends and yelled at me because dinner wasn't ready exactly how he wanted it. "Mom, please, is it too much to ask for decent food when we get home? What else are you good for around here?" His words hit me like invisible punches, but the next day he acted as if nothing had happened. And I, as always, pretended nothing had happened either. Patricia was there that night listening to everything and didn't say a single word in my defense. As I stirred the sugar in my cup, I remembered with painful clarity the conversation I had overheard 3 months ago between Robert and Patricia. I was watering the plants on the patio when their voices drifted out from their open bedroom window. "I just don't know what to do with your mother anymore, Robert. She's getting so difficult. She always wants to give her opinion on everything. She's always there when we want to be alone. Patricia was saying with that exasperated voice she used when talking about things that annoyed her. I know, babe, but what do you want me to do? She's my mom. I can't kick her out to the street. Robert had replied with a tone suggesting the idea wasn't entirely unappealing to him. Besides, she helps us with the household expenses, and you know we're short on cash. There was the naked truth. I wasn't family to them. I was an employee who paid for the privilege of working in their house. But Robert, I'm 38 years old and I feel like I've never had my own house. She's always there opining on how to decorate, what to cook, how to raise Haley, Patricia continued. Sometimes I feel like a guest in my own home. The irony was devastating. The house had been mine and Michael's for 30 years before they moved in with us temporarily when they got married. That temporarily had turned into 18 years of being treated like a guest. Robert had sighed deeply before answering, "Give it time, Patricia. When Mom gets a little older and needs more medical care, we can start looking for a place where she's better looked after." Those words stabbed into my heart like icy daggers. They weren't talking about caring for me when I was older. They were talking about getting rid of me as soon as it was legally and socially acceptable to do so. I set the cup on the table with trembling hands. For 3 months, I had carried that conversation in silence, pretending I hadn't heard it, behaving like the loving and understanding grandmother they expected me to be. I had kept cooking their favorite meals, washing their clothes, taking care of their house, paying bills, smiling when they spoke to me, thanking them for the crumbs of attention they gave me. I headed to my room and opened the closet where I kept my old photographs. I needed to remember who I had been before I became the old lady who was in the way. I found photos of my youth when I worked as an executive secretary at a textile factory and was known for my efficiency and decisive character. There was one photo in particular that caught my eye. Me at 25, standing in front of the office with a confident smile, dressed in my best suit, hair perfectly styled. That woman in the photograph had been brave, independent, respected by her colleagues. She had saved money, dollar by dollar, to buy this house. She had raised Robert practically alone after Michael got sick. She had made difficult decisions and moved forward without asking anyone for help. When had I allowed that strong woman to transform into the shadow of herself that I was now? The answer came as I flipped through more photographs. Gradually, year after year, I had surrendered pieces of my personality to maintain family harmony. When Robert got married and moved into the house with Patricia, I started walking on eggshells around my daughter-in-law's feelings. When Haley was born, I accepted being the unpaid nanny so Patricia could adapt to being a mother. When Robert had financial problems, I offered my pension without being asked, just to prove how useful I could be. Every concession had been small, justified as maternal love, explained as keeping the family together. But all those small concessions had accumulated until they turned me into a stranger in my own home, an employee in my own family, a beggar for affection in my own life. I found a box of letters Michael had written me while we were dating. In one of them, written when we were 20, he told me, "Hope, what I love most about you is your indomitable spirit. Never let anyone, not even me, extinguish that flame you have inside. Promise me you will always be the strong and independent woman I fell in love with." Tears fell onto the yellowed letter. Michael had died without knowing that I had betrayed that promise, that I had let others extinguish that flame until it turned to ash. But as I read his words, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Rage. Not the destructive rage that hurts others, but the constructive rage that pushes you to change your situation. Michael was right. Somewhere inside me that indomitable woman still existed. She had just been asleep under layers of complacency and fear of abandonment. I took out my address book, that old leather agenda Michael had given me for our 10th anniversary. I looked for the number of Mr. Henderson, the attorney who had handled the paperwork when Michael died. I had known him for over 20 years, and he had always treated me with genuine respect. I dialed the number with fingers that trembled slightly, not from fear, but from anticipation. "Mr. Henderson, this is Hope Miller speaking. I apologize for bothering you, but I need your help with an urgent legal matter," I told him when he answered the phone. His voice brightened when he recognized me. "Mrs. Miller, what a pleasure to hear from you. Tell me, how can I help you?" His professional but warm tone gave me the confidence I needed. "Mr. Henderson, I need to review some documents regarding my house and my bank accounts. I also want to make some changes to my legal documents." We agreed to meet that same afternoon at his office. After hanging up the phone, I felt as if I had taken the first real step toward recovering my dignity. For years, I had allowed Robert to handle my affairs to make things easier for me, but now I realized that making things easier had meant taking away control over my own life. While getting ready to leave, I remembered another painful conversation I had witnessed unintentionally. It was 6 months ago when Haley turned 17. I had been saving for months to buy her the cell phone she wanted so badly, sacrificing small, personal expenses to gather the money. On her birthday, when I gave her the gift, Haley opened it with genuine enthusiasm and gave me a hug that filled me with joy. But that same night, when they thought I was asleep, I heard Haley talking to her boyfriend on the phone. "Yeah, my grandma gave me this phone, but my parents are going to buy me a better one next week. This one is okay just to get by, but you know how old people are, they always buy cheap stuff." Her words shattered my heart. It wasn't just that she didn't appreciate the effort I had made to buy that gift, but that she had learned from her parents to view me as someone whose actions had less value simply because of my age. I also remembered the time I tried to help Haley with her history homework. I had lived through many of the events she was studying and thought I could share interesting perspectives, but when I started telling her my experiences, she interrupted me. "Oh, Grandma, that's useless now. I need updated information, not stories from the olden days." Patricia, who was present, laughed and added, "Haley is right, Hope. Times have changed a lot." At that moment, I felt humiliated, as if my life experiences had no value, as if my decades of wisdom were obsolete and irrelevant. But now, remembering that scene, I realized the problem wasn't that my knowledge was obsolete, but that they had labeled me a relic of the past to justify not taking me seriously. The walk to Mr. Henderson's office took me 40 minutes, but every step made me feel stronger. I hadn't left the house alone for anything other than the market or the pharmacy in months. There was always someone worried about my safety. There was always a reason why it was better for me to stay home. Now I realized those worries were subtle ways to keep me isolated and dependent. At the office, Mr. Henderson received me with the same professionalism and respect he had always shown me. "Mrs. Miller, it is very good to see you. You look very well, very determined. Tell me, what do you need?" I explained my situation carefully, without getting into emotional details, but being clear about my intentions. I wanted to review all my legal documents, to understand exactly what my rights and options were. "Let me check your files," the lawyer said as he opened a thick folder. "I see the house is completely in your name, which is excellent. You also have 2 bank accounts, savings and checking, both solely in your name. Your Social Security and pension are deposited directly into your checking account." While he spoke, I felt enormous relief. Despite years of allowing Robert to help with my finances, I had kept legal control of my assets. "Mr. Henderson, I have an important question," I said, taking a deep breath before continuing. "If I decided I no longer want certain people living in my house, what are my legal options?" Mr. Henderson looked at me with understanding. As an experienced lawyer, he had probably seen similar cases many times. "Mrs. Miller, you are the sole owner of the house. You have every legal right to decide who lives there and who doesn't." He explained the legal eviction process in detail, the timing involved, tenants' rights versus the owner's rights. He also informed me about my financial options. I could change my bank accounts, modify my will, establish new beneficiaries for my pension. "It is important you understand, Mrs. Miller, that you have much more control over your situation than you probably believe." For 2 hours we reviewed documents, discussed options, planned strategies. For the first time in years, I felt like a competent adult, taking informed decisions about my own life. Mr. Henderson treated me like what I was, an intelligent and capable 70-year-old woman, not a confused old lady who needed others to think for her. When I left the office, I had a clear plan and the necessary documents to implement it, but more importantly, I had something I had lost without realizing it: respect for myself. During the walk back home, I reflected on how I had come to allow others to dictate the terms of my existence. I vividly remembered the first time Robert suggested it would be easier if he handled some of my accounts. "Mom, you've done enough working all your life. Let me help you with these boring money and paper things." At that moment, it had seemed considerate, a sign that my son worried about easing my burdens. Now I saw it had been the first step in a gradual process of infantilization. Step by step, Decision by decision, I had been handing over pieces of my autonomy. First it was finances, then decisions about the house, then opinions about the family. Every time I ceded control, they took more. Every time they treated me as less capable, I behaved as less capable. It had been a vicious cycle of dependence that I myself had allowed to be created. When I arrived home, I found it exactly as I had left it, silent, orderly, full of evidence of the life I had built and others had taken as theirs. But now I saw it with different eyes. This wasn't the house where I was tolerated out of charity. It was my house where others had been welcome until they abused that welcome. I sat in my living room, in my favorite armchair, and looked at the family photographs hanging on my walls. All those smiles in the photographs, all those moments I had believed special, took on a new meaning under the light of what I now knew. Robert hugging me at his college graduation while planning to move me to a nursing home as soon as possible. Patricia smiling with me on Mother's Day while calling me the old lady behind my back. Haley kissing me on my birthday while telling her friends her grandmother's gift was cheap. But instead of feeling more pain, I felt something unexpected. Liberation. Finally, I could see reality without the fantasies I had built myself to protect me. I no longer had to pretend that the slights were misunderstandings, that the cruelty was accidental, that emotional abuse was love. The truth hurt, but it also set me free. That night, while dining alone in my kitchen, I made a list of all the ways I had contributed to my own victimization. I had been too generous with my money, too permissive with disrespect, too willing to justify the unjustifiable. I had taught my family to treat me poorly by accepting that treatment without protest. But I also made a list of my strengths, the things Robert and Patricia had underestimated. I had a home of my own, substantial savings, a clear mind, and most importantly, finally, I had the determination to change my situation. At 70, I still had time to live with dignity. Before going to bed, I called my sister Rose in Chicago. We hadn't really talked in months, only superficial exchanges of courtesy. Rose, it's Hope. I need to tell you something important. For an hour, I told her everything. The trip I was excluded from, the conversations I had overheard, the humiliations I had endured, the plans I had made. Rose listened in silence until I finished. Then, with a voice trembling with rage, she said, "Hope, I knew something wasn't right. The last time I spoke to Robert, he seemed very cold when I mentioned your name, and Patricia never sat right with me. She was always so calculating." Her words confirmed that my perceptions weren't the paranoia of an old woman, but valid observations I had been ignoring. "Sister, what are you going to do?" Rose asked. For the first time in years, I could answer with total confidence. "I am going to reclaim my life, Rose. I am going to show them they completely underestimated the woman they thought they could manipulate." When we hung up, Rose had promised me her total support and invited me to stay with her in Chicago if I needed a place to rebuild my life. That night, I slept better than I had in months. There was no guilt, no fear, no doubts about whether I was being too harsh or too sensitive. There was clarity, determination, and for the first time in years, real hope. Robert and Patricia had made a fatal mistake by underestimating me. They were about to discover that the woman they had treated as a useless old lady was actually a formidable force they had awakened from her slumber. Tomorrow, the implementation of my plan would begin. Tomorrow, Hope Miller would stop being a victim and become the architect of her own destiny. The 6th day dawned, with a golden light filtering through the curtains of my room, as if the universe itself were celebrating my internal awakening. I got up at 5 a.m., not because I had to make breakfast for ingrates, but because I had a mission to fulfill. For the first time in decades, every movement I made was for me. Every decision I took was mine. Every step I took brought me closer to the freedom I deserved. While I brewed my coffee, I took out the list I had written the night before. Point by point, I had documented every action I needed to take to regain total control of my life. It wouldn't be a dramatic explosion of screams and complaints. That was what they would expect from the emotional old lady. It would be something much more devastating. It would be methodical, silent, legal, and irreversible. The first point on my list was to change the locks. I dialed the number of the locksmith I had noted from the phone book. "Good morning. I need to change all the locks on my house today," I told the man who answered. "It is urgent, and I will pay in cash." Mentioning cash payment accelerated any service. The locksmith confirmed he would be at my house before noon. While I waited, I started the second part of my plan. I took 2 large suitcases out of my closet, ones I hadn't used since my honeymoon with Michael. For the next 2 hours, I carefully packed all my important belongings. My favorite clothes, the jewelry Michael had given me, the photos of my youth, my books, the documents I had recovered from Mr. Henderson. Every object I put in the suitcases was a small declaration of independence. What I didn't pack was equally significant. I left all the clothes Robert and Patricia had bought me with their comments of "this fits a lady of your age better." I left the cheap gifts Haley had given me with an air of obligation. I left everything that reminded me of my role as the submissive old lady I had been. Hope Miller would take only what truly belonged to her. At 10 a.m., the locksmith arrived punctually. He was an older man, probably of my generation, with calloused hands and a kind smile. "Family trouble, ma'am?" he asked while examining the front door. His tone wasn't nosy, but understanding, as if he had seen this situation many times before. "Something like that," I replied. "How long will the job take?" "About 3 hours for all the doors, ma'am. And don't worry, no one but you will have the keys." While the locksmith worked, I continued with my plan. I called the bank where I had my accounts for 20 years. "I need to speak with the branch manager, please. It is regarding my bank accounts." The manager, Mr. Morris, knew me personally and attended to me with the professional courtesy a client of so many years deserved. "Mrs. Miller, how may I serve you?" "Mr. Morris, I need to make some important changes to my accounts. First, I want to remove my son Robert from any access to my accounts. Second, I want to change all my passwords and security codes. Third, I want to open a new account at a different branch." The silence on the other end of the line lasted barely a few seconds. "Of course, Mrs. Miller. Can you come to the bank this afternoon? We will need you to sign some documents." The next call was to the phone company. For years, Robert had handled the house phone account to make things easier. Now I wanted that account solely in my name with a new password that only I knew. The company employee was very efficient. "Mrs. Miller, as the homeowner, there is no problem transferring the account completely to your name. Do you also want to cancel any additional services?" "Yes," I replied without hesitation. "I want to cancel the cell phone service that is in my name but used by my granddaughter." It was the phone I had been paying $50 a month for, the same one Patricia had mentioned in that cruel note I found. "Cancelled immediately, ma'am. Service will be cut in an hour." Next, I called the cable and internet company. Same story. Transfer everything to my exclusive name, change all passwords, and add a security code that prevented changes without my personal authorization. When Robert and Patricia returned, they would find they no longer had access to any service I paid for. The locksmith finished his work at 1 p.m. He handed me 6 new keys and explained the function of the new high-security deadbolts. "Ma'am, these locks are top quality. No one will be able to get in without the correct keys, and if someone tries to force them, they'll damage the mechanism and make it impossible to open." Perfect. Robert and Patricia would have to ring the doorbell like any visitor if I decided to open it for them. While I ate lunch alone in my kitchen, I reviewed my list and checked off each completed task. But the most important thing wasn't what I had done externally, but what was happening inside me. Every action I took made me feel stronger, more capable, more worthy of respect. For years I had forgotten what it felt like to take important decisions and see immediate results. In the afternoon, I went to the bank and signed all the necessary documents. Mr. Morris treated me with the same professional respect he had always shown, but he noticed something different in my attitude. "Mrs. Miller, you look very determined today," he commented as we reviewed the papers. "Yes, Mr. Morris. I have decided to take complete control of my life and finances," he nodded with approval. "I think that is excellent, ma'am. An independent woman should always handle her own affairs." On the way back home, I stopped at a florist near the bank. I bought a large bouquet of yellow roses. My favorite flowers, the ones Michael gave me when we were dating. I put them in the crystal vase I had inherited from my mother and placed them in the center of the dining table. They weren't for a special occasion, they were to celebrate that I had finally remembered I deserved beautiful things in my life. That night, after dining quietly, I called my sister Rose to tell her about my day. "Hope, I can't believe you did so much in a single day," she said with admiration. "You sound completely different, sister. You sound like the Hope I knew 40 years ago." She was right. For the first time in decades, I felt like myself. "Rose, there is something else I need to do," I told her. "I want you to come visit me next weekend. It's been too long since we spent time together, and I want you to see how I am living now." Rose accepted immediately. For years, family visits had been controlled by Robert and Patricia, always with excuses about inconvenient dates or lack of space. Now I decided who was welcome in my house and when. The 7th day, I woke up feeling like a new woman. I had regained control of my house, my finances, my communications, and most importantly, my self-esteem. But I knew the real test would come when Robert and Patricia returned from their trip. I had to be prepared for their reactions, their manipulations, their attempts to make me feel guilty. I decided to use that day to strengthen myself mentally and emotionally. I took out a new notebook and began writing a letter I would never send, but needed to write to clarify my thoughts. "Robert and Patricia," I wrote. "For 18 years, I allowed you to convert my maternal love into a tool to control me. I gave you my house, my money, my time, my energy, and in exchange, I received scorn, lies, and the humiliation of being treated like a nuisance in my own life." Writing those words was liberating and painful at the same time. Every line I put on paper was an acknowledgement of years of emotional abuse I had justified as normal family problems. "You taught me that my only function in this family was to serve and be silent. You taught me that my feelings didn't matter, that my opinions were annoying, that my presence was tolerated out of charity. But you forgot to teach me the most important lesson, that I have the power to decide when enough is enough." I continued writing for hours, documenting every humiliation, every manipulation, every moment I had been treated as less than human. But I also wrote about my awakening, about my rediscovery of my own strength, about my decision to live with dignity or not live in that situation at all. "You thought you could get rid of me as if I were trash. You were completely wrong. I will get rid of you, but with class, with legality, and with the satisfaction of knowing you deserve it." That afternoon, while sorting papers at my desk, I found something that froze my blood. A price quote for nursing homes, hidden among the bills Robert handled for me. The quote was dated 2 months ago and had notes in Patricia's handwriting. "Reasonable prices, shared rooms available, accept Social Security as payment." On the back of the sheet were numbers written in pencil, calculating how much money would be left for them after paying for my care. Reality hit me like a punch in the gut. The trip from which they excluded me hadn't just been a vacation, it had been a practice run. They had been planning to get rid of me permanently. The place where I would be better looked after, which Robert had mentioned in that conversation I overheard, wasn't a vague idea for the future. It was a concrete plan they were already researching. I looked through more papers and found other evidence of their betrayal. A medical appointment they had scheduled for me, without my knowledge, with a psychiatrist specializing in mental competency evaluations in the elderly. They had been building a case to declare me mentally incompetent. The appointment was scheduled for the following week, upon their return from the trip. I also found drafts of letters addressed to relatives explaining my mental deterioration and the painful necessity of seeking professional care for me. The letters were written in a tone of feigned sadness that nauseated me. "It is very difficult for us to make this decision, but Mom can no longer live independently," said one of the letters addressed to my sister Rose. "We hope you understand this is best for everyone, especially for her." I sat in my favorite chair with those documents in my trembling hands. Robert and Patricia hadn't just planned to abandon me. They had orchestrated a complete plan to steal my freedom, my money, and my dignity legally. If I hadn't woken up in time, in a few weeks I would be in a nursing home against my will, declared incompetent, while they lived comfortably in my house with my money. But instead of feeling terror or despair, I felt something much more powerful, a cold, calculated determination. They had completely underestimated their victim. They thought they were deceiving a confused old lady, but they had awakened an intelligent and furious woman who now had concrete evidence of their criminal intentions. I photocopied all the documents I had found. Some copies I kept in my safe deposit box at the bank, others I sent to my sister Rose by certified mail, and others I took directly to Mr. Henderson's office. "Mrs. Miller, this is very serious," he told me when he reviewed the evidence. "What your relatives were planning constitutes fraud, conspiracy, and elder abuse. These are federal crimes." "Mr. Henderson, what options do I have?" I asked him. Well, Mrs. Miller, you can press criminal charges against them, but that would be a long and public process, or you can use this information to protect yourself and ensure they can never hurt you again. I preferred the second option. I didn't want a public scandal. I wanted silent but effective justice. The lawyer helped me prepare a legal document that had been drafted specifically to protect me. It was a preemptive protective order and revocation of any implied power of attorney that would prevent Robert and Patricia from approaching my bank accounts, my properties, or my medical affairs without my explicit written authorization. It also included an affidavit of mental competency, signed by 2 independent doctors who had reviewed the evidence and confirmed I was perfectly sane. Mrs. Miller, with these documents you are completely legally protected, the lawyer explained. If they try to make any legal move against you, these papers will demonstrate their motives are fraudulent and that you are completely competent to make your own decisions. I felt as if I had invisible, yet impenetrable armor. That night, while dining with my yellow flowers as company, I reflected on how far I had come in just 1 week. I had gone from being a silent victim to an empowered woman with total control over her destiny. Robert and Patricia would return tomorrow, expecting to find the submissive, grateful old lady they had left. Instead, they would find Hope Miller, a woman who had regained her dignity and was prepared to defend her territory. I decided to write one last letter, this time one I would deliver to them. But it wouldn't be a letter of emotional complaints or pleas for better treatment. It would be a cold, legal, professional notification of the changes in our relationship. Robert and Patricia, I wrote with clear and firm handwriting. During your absence, I have had time to reflect on our cohabitation and have made important decisions regarding my future. Effective immediately, you are tenants in this house, not permanent residents. You will have 30 days to find an alternative place to live. During this transition period, you will pay a monthly rent of $1,500 plus half of all utilities. There will be no meals included, laundry included, or any other domestic service from my part. I am the owner of this house, not your employee. Furthermore, all services I previously paid for Haley's cell phone, cable, internet have been canceled or transferred solely to my name with new passwords. If you wish to have these services, you may contract them under your own financial responsibility. Writing those lines filled me with deep satisfaction. Finally, I was establishing clear boundaries and real consequences. If you find these terms unacceptable, you are free to leave immediately. If you attempt to intimidate me, manipulate me, or make any legal move against me, you will discover that I am fully protected and have substantial evidence of your fraudulent intentions toward my person. I signed the letter Hope Miller, homeowner, and sealed it in an envelope I would leave on the kitchen table, where they had left their cruel note a week ago. Before going to bed, I walked through my house admiring everything I had achieved. The new locks made me feel safe. The yellow flowers made me feel beautiful. The legal documents made me feel protected. For the first time in years, my house felt truly mine. Robert and Patricia had committed the fatal mistake of underestimating their victim. Tomorrow they would discover that the woman they had treated like disposable trash was actually an unstoppable force who had awakened from her slumber. I went to sleep that night with a smile on my lips and peace in my heart. I had stopped being the old lady in the way and had become Hope Miller, a 70-year-old woman who had finally learned to value herself. Robert and Patricia would return tomorrow from their trip, but they would no longer return to the same house or the same woman they had left behind. They would return to face the consequences of their actions, and those consequences would be as silent as they were devastating. The 8th day dawned with a clear sky that seemed to reflect the mental clarity I had achieved. I got up early, not out of nervousness, but out of anticipation. Today Robert and Patricia would return from their trip, and I was completely prepared to receive the strangers who had ceased to be my family the day they decided to treat me like disposable trash. I prepared my breakfast calmly, enjoying every sip of coffee in my quiet kitchen. The letter I had written them was on the table, sealed and waiting. Next to it, I had placed the old house keys, the ones that no longer worked, as a perfect symbol of what they had lost by underestimating me. Everything was exactly where it should be. At 9 a.m., the doorbell rang. I didn't run to open it as I would have before, when I was the old lady anxious to please. I walked calmly to the door and looked through the window. It was Robert, suitcases in hand and an expression of growing irritation as he tried to open the door with his old keys. "Mom!" he shouted from outside. "The keys don't work. Open the door." His tone was that of someone used to being obeyed immediately, the tone of a man who had never considered his mother could make independent decisions. I took my time walking to the door, enjoying every second of his confusion. When I finally opened it, Robert burst into the house with Patricia and Haley behind him. "What happened with the locks? Why don't our keys work?" His question contained indignation, as if I had committed some crime by changing the locks on my own house. Patricia looked at me with that annoyed expression I knew so well, as if I were an inconvenience she had to tolerate. "Good morning," I said with a calm that clearly threw them off. "How was your trip?" My tone was polite but distant, the tone I would use with visitors who aren't particularly welcome. Robert dropped the suitcases on the living room floor without asking permission. Exactly the attitude I had tolerated for 18 years, but would not tolerate for one day more. "Mom, why did you change the locks?" "We almost called the police thinking something bad happened," Robert said, but his concern sounded fake. What really bothered him was that I had done something without his permission, something that altered the control he thought he had over my life. "And the cable doesn't work, nor the internet, nor Haley's phone. What is going on here?" "There is a letter on the kitchen table that explains all the changes," I replied, pointing toward the kitchen. "You can read it while I unpack, or rather, while you handle your things." Robert looked at me as if I had spoken in a foreign language. During 18 years, I had run to help them with luggage, to prepare food after any trip, to listen with feigned enthusiasm to details of adventures I had been excluded from. Patricia was the first to walk toward the kitchen with that way of moving she had, as if she owned the place. I heard her open the envelope and began to mentally count how long it would take her to read the whole letter. 10 seconds later, I heard her gasp, followed by the sound of footsteps running back to the living room. "Robert, come here immediately." Patricia's voice had a barely controlled panic. "Your mom has gone crazy. She's talking about kicking us out of the house and charging us rent." Hearing how she described me as crazy for making rational decisions about my own property confirmed I had made the right choice. For Patricia, any woman who didn't let herself be controlled was automatically crazy. Robert ran to the kitchen, and I heard the paper rustle as he read the letter. The silence that followed was delicious. I could imagine his face processing the words, gradually realizing that the submissive mother he had taken for granted no longer existed. When he returned to the living room, his expression had changed completely. It was no longer irritation. It was genuine shock. "Mom, what is all this? Why are you acting in such a strange way? Is someone influencing you?" "We know you must be upset because we went on a trip without you, but this is a huge exaggeration. It was only 7 days." "It was only 7 days," I repeated slowly, allowing the weight of those words to settle in the air. "Robert, those 7 days taught me something very valuable. They taught me exactly what my life is like when you aren't here pretending to love me while planning to get rid of me." His eyes widened slightly. He hadn't expected me to be so informed about his true intentions. Patricia approached with that fake smile I now recognized as her favorite manipulation tool. "Hope, I think there is a misunderstanding here. We love you. You are family. Maybe you need to rest a little after being alone so many days. Sometimes loneliness can make elderly people feel confused." "Confused?" I asked, taking the photocopies of the documents I had found out of my purse. Was I confused when I found the nursing home quote? Was I confused when I found the appointment with the psychiatrist you scheduled without my knowledge? Was I confused when I read the letters you wrote explaining my alleged mental deterioration? The color drained from Robert and Patricia's faces simultaneously. Haley, who had been silent until now, looked at her parents with an expression of genuine confusion. What is Grandma talking about? What nursing home? What medical appointments? For the first time, I realized my granddaughter hadn't been part of the conspiracy. She had been as deceived as I was. "Your grandma is inventing things, honey," Patricia said quickly, but her voice trembled. "Older people sometimes imagine conspiracies that don't exist. It's common when they start losing their reason." Even while the evidence of her betrayal was literally in my hands, Patricia was still trying to make me look like the crazy one in the situation. I extended the documents toward Haley. "Why don't you read these papers and decide for yourself if your grandma is inventing things?" Haley took the documents with shaking hands. As she read, her expression went from confusion to horror, from horror to disgust. When she finished, she looked at me with tears in her eyes. Grandma, I didn't know anything about this. My parents told me you decided not to come on the trip because you didn't feel well. Haley turned toward her parents with an expression I had never seen directed at them, total disappointment. You were going to put Grandma in a home? You were going to declare her crazy? Is all this real? Robert cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the situation. Haley, things aren't as simple as they seem in those papers. Your grandma is aging, and we were exploring options for when she needs more care. It's not that we wanted to hurt anyone. His explanation sounded rehearsed, as if he had been preparing this defense for months. Exploring options? My voice rose for the first time in the entire conversation. Robert, I cook my own meals, I clean my own house, I handle my own affairs, and I am perfectly sane. What type of additional care do I need exactly? I looked him directly in the eyes. Unless you refer to the type of care that allows you to keep my house and my money while I conveniently disappear. Patricia tried a new strategy, hope. Maybe we misunderstood things. Maybe we made hasty decisions. But all we want is the best for you and for the family. We can talk about this like adults and find a solution that works for everyone. Her tone was that of someone speaking to a small child having a tantrum. I already found the solution that works for me, I replied firmly. It is all explained in the letter. You have 30 days to find your own place to live. Meanwhile, you will pay rent and utilities like any normal tenant. I am no longer your maid, your ATM, or your problem to solve by committing me somewhere. Robert stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous. This is our house too. We have lived here for 18 years. His true personality began to emerge when things didn't go his way. You can't kick us out as if we were strangers. I am your son. Exactly, I told him, keeping myself perfectly calm while he lost his composure. You are my son, and for 18 years I gave you a free home, free food, free utilities, free childcare for your daughter, and unconditional emotional support. In exchange, you and your wife planned to declare me mentally incompetent to steal my house and my money. I got up from my chair and walked toward the window, turning my back to them as I continued speaking. The difference between us, Robert, is that when I gave you all that, I did it out of love. When you planned to strip me of everything, you did it out of greed. I turned to face them again. So yes, I can kick you out as if you were a stranger, because that is exactly what you became the day you decided to treat me like an obstacle instead of your mother. Haley still held the documents in her hands, reading them over and over as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Dad, she said finally with a broken voice. Here it says, you calculated how much money would be left over for you after paying for Grandma's nursing home. You did math on getting rid of her. Her voice grew stronger as she spoke. How could you do something so horrible? It's not horrible, Patricia exploded. Your grandmother is becoming difficult to handle. She's always opining on everything. She's always there when we want privacy. We have the right to live our own lives without having to take care of a demanding old woman. Finally, she had told the truth. For Patricia, being treated with basic respect in my own home was being demanding. Demanding? I asked with a cold smile. Patricia, do you know what is actually demanding? Demanding is living rent-free in someone's house for 18 years. Demanding is expecting someone else to pay your utilities, cook your food, and watch your daughter. Demanding is planning to steal someone's life because it is more convenient for you. Robert tried to regain control one more time. Mom, this is getting blown out of proportion. I know you're angry, and you have a right to be. We made mistakes, but we are family, and families work together to solve problems. They don't get rid of each other. His tone had changed from indignation to pleading, which told me he was finally starting to understand the seriousness of his situation. You're right, Robert. Families work together, I agreed. Families respect each other. Families don't lie to each other. Families don't plan to betray each other for money. I walked to the table where I had left more documents. But apparently, you and Patricia have a different definition of family than mine. I took out the legal documents Mr. Henderson had prepared. Robert, these are documents that protect all my assets from any attempt at interference. There is also a protective order and revocation of power of attorney that prevents anyone from trying to make medical or financial decisions for me without my specific written authorization. His eyes widened as he realized the implications. Furthermore, I continued, enjoying every word, I have sent copies of all the evidence of your conspiracy to my lawyer, my sister Rose, and my bank. If anything were to mysteriously happen to me, or if anyone tried to declare me incompetent, there are multiple people who know exactly what to look for and whom to hold responsible. Patricia slumped onto the sofa as if her legs had stopped working. "We can't pay rent," she whispered. "We spent almost all our savings on this trip. We thought that. She stopped, realizing she was about to admit they had spent money they didn't have because they expected access to my money soon. "You thought you would already have access to my money after committing me," I finished the sentence for her. "You thought by now you would be living free in my house while I disappeared into some nursing home where I couldn't cause you problems." I looked her straight in the eyes. "What a disappointment it must be to discover your victim was smarter than you." Haley stood up abruptly and walked toward the door. "I can't be here right now," she said with tears running down her cheeks. "I need to think about all this. Grandma, I am so sorry. If I had known—" Her voice broke, and she ran out of the house. Robert and Patricia remained silent for several minutes. I could see the wheels turning in their heads, trying to find a way out of the situation they themselves had created. Finally, Robert spoke with a voice that sounded defeated. "What do you want us to do, Mom? How do we fix this?" "There is nothing to fix, Robert," I replied with a firmness that surprised even me. "You revealed who you really are. I am simply responding appropriately to that revelation." I sat in my favorite chair, the chair that had been mine for decades but where I had rarely felt comfortable when they were around. "You have 30 days to find a place to live. During those 30 days, you will pay $1,500 in rent plus half of all utilities. There will be no prepared meals, no laundry service, no house cleaning from my end. You will be tenants, nothing more." I paused to let my words settle. "After those 30 days, I don't want to see you in my house unless you are specifically invited." Patricia found her voice again, but now it sounded desperate. "Hope, please, be reasonable. We are family. Haley is your granddaughter. Are you really going to destroy the family over a misunderstanding?" She was still trying to minimize what they had done, calling it a misunderstanding instead of the calculated betrayal it had been. "Patricia, you already destroyed this family the day you decided I was disposable," I replied without emotion. "I am simply acknowledging that reality and acting accordingly." I got up and walked to the front door, opening it wide. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have plans for the rest of the day. You can unpack your things and read the letter again if you need clarification on the terms." Robert stood up slowly, like a man who had just aged 10 years in 10 minutes. "Mom, I never thought things would get to this point." For the first time in the entire conversation, he sounded genuinely remorseful. "I know we made big mistakes, but isn't there a way we can start over?" I looked at him for a long moment. This man who had been my baby, my little boy, my rebellious teenager, my adult son in whom I had placed all my trust. "Robert," I told him finally, "there are some betrayals you forgive but never forget, and there are others that simply change forever the way you see a person." "That means no?" he whispered. "That means I respect my peace of mind too much to risk it again," I replied. "I wish you the best in your new life, son. I hope you learn to value the people who love you before it is too late. Now, please, step out of my house. When you return this afternoon, ring the doorbell. This is no longer your house. It is mine. And visitors ring the doorbell." I watched them leave with their suitcases, Robert carrying most of the luggage while Patricia walked behind him with her head down. For the first time in 18 years, I was watching them leave my house knowing they would return as tenants, not owners. The feeling of liberation was indescribable. I closed the door behind them and leaned against it, breathing deeply. I had done it. I had confronted my abusers, established firm boundaries, and taken complete control of my life. At 70, I had finally learned that being loved conditionally by people who use you is infinitely worse than being alone with dignity. That afternoon, my sister Rose arrived as we had planned. When I told her everything that happened that morning, she hugged me with tears in her eyes. "Hope, I am so proud of you. You finally recovered the strong woman you always were inside." We spent the afternoon walking through my garden, making plans for trips we could take together, talking about the life I could now live without fear. When Robert and Patricia returned that afternoon, they rang the doorbell as I had asked. I opened the door, handed them new tenant keys, and explained the house rules as I would with any renter. Their transformation from manipulative family to resentful tenants was complete, and I had finally reclaimed my home. It has been 3 months since Robert and Patricia moved out of my house, and I can state with absolute certainty that these have been the most peaceful 3 months of the last 18 years. My morning routine now begins with the sound of birds instead of the noise of arguments or the silent tension of living with people who considered me a burden. I get up when my body asks me to, not when others expect me to have breakfast ready. Every morning, while I make my coffee in the kitchen that finally feels like mine, I reflect on the path that brought me here. The yellow flowers I now buy every week have replaced the long faces I used to see at this table. The silence of my house isn't the painful silence of abandonment I felt during those 7 days. It is the serene silence of a woman who finally lives on her own terms. Robert fulfilled his promise to leave before the 30 days were up, not because he had found a better place to live, but because Patricia couldn't stand paying rent in a house where she had previously lived for free. "I'm not paying rent to a crazy old woman," she had told Robert loud enough for me to hear from my room. Even at the end, she couldn't accept that her actions had consequences. They took only their personal belongings and left the house cleaner than I had expected. There were no dramatic scenes, no screams or slammed doors. They simply packed their things and left like the undesirable tenants they had become. The last time I saw Robert, he handed me the keys without saying a word. His pride was too wounded to admit he had completely underestimated the woman who gave him life. Haley was the only one who returned to visit me after her parents moved. At first, she came every 2 weeks, then every week, and now she comes 3 times a week after school. Without the toxic influence of her parents, my granddaughter has shown the genuinely loving heart I always knew she had. "Grandma, now I understand why my parents never wanted me to spend much time with you," she told me during one of our baking afternoons. "You teach me things they don't want me to learn." "Like what, honey?" I asked while we kneaded sweet dough together. "You teach me that women don't have to accept being treated badly to keep the peace. You teach me that it is better to be alone with dignity than accompanied without respect." Her words filled me with a pride I hadn't felt in years. Maybe the most valuable thing I had saved from this situation wasn't my house or my money, but the opportunity to be the grandmother Haley really needed. My sister Rose now visits me every month, alternating between staying at my house or taking me to Chicago to spend time with her family. Her children, my nephews, treat me with the genuine affection I had forgotten I deserved. "Aunt Hope, you look 20 years younger," my nephew Michael told me the last time I visited. "You are glowing in a way I've never seen before." He was right. When you don't carry the weight of daily humiliation, the soul rejuvenates naturally. 2 months ago, Robert called me for the first time since he moved out. His voice sounded tired, defeated. "Mom, Patricia and we're getting a divorce," he told me without preamble. I felt no satisfaction hearing those words, only a quiet sadness for the family we could have been if they had chosen love over greed. "I am very sorry, Robert," I replied, and I was sincere. I regretted that he had to lose so much to learn such a basic lesson. "Mom, do you think someday we could try to rebuild our relationship?" His question hung in the air like a desperate plea. For a few seconds, I considered the possibility, but then I remembered the nursing home documents, the calculations about my money, the cruel conversations I had heard. "Robert," I told him finally, "there are some betrayals you forgive, but never forget, and there are others that simply change forever the way you see a person." "That means no," he whispered. "That means I respect my peace of mind too much to risk it again," I replied. "I wish you the best in your new life, son. I hope you learn to value the people who love you before it is too late." It was the last real conversation we had. He kept calling sporadically, but I kept the conversations brief and superficial. Patricia never contacted me directly, but Haley told me she had gone back to live with her mother in Phoenix. "She says this whole situation was your fault for being too difficult," Haley related with a mix of sadness and indignation. Even in defeat, Patricia couldn't accept responsibility for her actions. To her, I was still the villain of a story where she was the misunderstood victim. Now that I live alone, I have rediscovered hobbies I had abandoned to dedicate time to serving others. I picked up reading again, something Michael and I used to do together in the evenings. I have read more books in these 3 months than in the last 5 years. I also went back to sewing, creating tablecloths and pillow covers that decorated my house according to my tastes, not the preferences of ungrateful tenants. The garden has bloomed under my exclusive care, without people trampling my plants to take shortcuts, without complaints about the time I dedicated to watering the flowers. My roses have grown more beautiful than ever. Every morning after coffee, I spend an hour tending my plants. It is a silent meditation that connects me with the earth and reminds me that growth requires patience, but the wait is worth it. The neighbors have noticed the change in me. Mrs. Higgins, who lives next door, commented last week, "Hope, I don't know what happened in your house, but you seem like a completely new woman. You look calmer, happier." I smiled at her and simply said, "I learned to value myself. Carmen, turns out that changes everything." Financially, my life has improved considerably. Without 3 additional people consuming utilities I paid for, without extra expenses on food for ingrates, without loans that were never repaid, my Social Security check is now enough to live comfortably and even afford some luxuries I had denied myself for years. Last month, I bought a new TV. Not because the old one didn't work, but because I wanted one just for me. The nights are especially beautiful now. Without arguments in the next room, without the sound of the TV at high volume until late hours, without the constant tension of walking on eggshells so as not to disturb anyone. I can read in peace, listen to my favorite music, or simply sit in the garden observing the stars Michael and I used to gaze at together. Sometimes, when the wind blows a certain way, I can almost hear Michael's voice telling me he is proud of the woman I have become again. The strong and independent woman he fell in love with so many years ago has finally returned a little older and considerably wiser, but with the same indomitable spirit he loved. This morning, while watering my geraniums, I reflected on the unexpected gift Robert and Patricia had given me without knowing it. Their betrayal had forced me to wake from a slumber of complacency that had lasted too long. Their abandonment had taught me I was stronger than I had imagined. Their greed had showed me the real value of self-respect. If asked if I would do things differently, the answer would be no. Every humiliation I endured taught me how much I am worth. Every betrayal I discovered showed me the importance of setting boundaries. Every day I live now in peace reminds me that choosing dignity over false comfort will always be the right decision. Haley will arrive in an hour to help me bake oatmeal cookies, Michael's favorites. I will teach her the recipe her great-grandmother taught me when I got married, a tradition that had been lost in years of prioritizing others' preferences over family heritage. Now I have time for these important things, for these real connections. The silence left after they departed isn't empty. It is full. It is full of possibilities, of peace, of regained self-respect. It is full of the wisdom that comes when you finally learn that some people come into your life to teach you lessons, not to stay forever. And sometimes, the most valuable lesson they can teach you is how well you can live without them.